Okay, it looks like it is a happening thing. I am happening, you are happening, and we are happening. Sorry, I'm starting to go all Gilbert and Sullivan again. Anyway, hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. I guess it's good morning in a lot of where I'm doing this. It's technically morning here, although since I never am getting up to do this, but doing this before bedtime in my time zone, it always seems like evening to me. But that's all right. That's how these things work. We all live in a subjective, solipsistic reality. And that's one of the reasons that empathy is such a crucial thing to develop, because we all live in our own heads. We are islands in the stream. Oh my God, sounds like I'm quoting that song. It was, I think it's originally was a Hemingway novel or something. Anyway, I can't remember. Doesn't matter. Hi, I'm Tad. I write books, and that's mostly what I do. I write books. I let dogs in and out of houses, my house. I try to be the calm voice of reason. Don't always succeed in whatever situations I'm in. And yeah, and I write books, and I'm just still, because we seem to be in a delay as far as publication of Navigator's Children, I'm just taking extra time to kind of polish it up a little bit and going back through things. And yeah, I'm at that stage. One of the things that any of you out there who are artists know, the most difficult thing, or one of the most difficult things about any kind of art or any kind of creation, is being finished, knowing when you're finished. Because for most of us, you could just kind of go on making small changes, because from day to day, different things look good. You know, one day you'll come along and go, oh, that is such a wordy sentence. There's got to be a more terse, straightforward way to say that. And then you do. And then the next day, if you're looking at the same thing again, you're going, oh, God, but it's missing something now. It needs that, and you're putting words back in. And then you're moving those words around, or you're trying different words. And, with a book that's 500,000 pages long, half a million words, sorry, not 500,000 pages. Oh my God, that's horrifying even to say by accident. But with a book that's 500,000 words long, I mean, you could do this stuff literally for years. And in fact, some writers did. Ralph Ellison, the wonderful American writer who wrote Invisible Man, not, I hasten to say, the H.G. Wells Invisible Man, which everybody knows, which is, one of the prototypical science fiction stories, and the underpinnings for some of actually the great horror movies of all time, especially the Claude Rains version, the Universal version from the 1940s, I believe, early 1940s. Anyway, no, The Invisible Man that I'm talking about was written by Ralph Ellison, who is an American writer, and a black American writer, which is significant because that's what Invisible Man is all about. It's a brilliant piece of work, about his experiences. I'm assuming in large part his experiences, or the experiences of a black man in America, and especially in an era before the sort of a lot of the black political movements of the 60s and 70s had taken off, trying to raise the visibility of black people in America. Anyway, wonderful book. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because Ellison's second novel took him like 28 years to write. And part of it was because, The Invisible Man was so good and so successful and critically admired, and all kinds of things. And it's my feeling, and I think I've read things to this effect, that he was kind of paralyzed and had real trouble being able to let go of a second book and live up to the responsibility of the first book. Now, for a writer like me, who is a working commercial writer, in other words, I'm not a professor somewhere, or I don't have a day job. Writing is my day job. I obviously have never had that kind of time to spend 10 or 15 years on a single book, trying to get it finished. I have with this newest project, which is 4 very long books and 2 small books, I have actually gotten very close now to 10 years working on this, which is shocking enough to me. But that's well over 1 million words. That's like 7 or 8, 10 normal people's books. So, you know, it's not like I'm holding on to these books extra long, but I am in that stage right at the moment with Navigator's Children where I'm because I'm kind of treading water, so to speak, as to what's going to happen and when it's going to get published. So, because of that, I'm taking extra time to go through things. I also have lots of notes and comments and things like that from my first readers, some of whom are probably tuned in tonight. And I do, of course, pay attention to what they have to say. I wouldn't have readers if I wasn't going to pay attention to what they had to say. And especially, I would not have a small coterie or posse or gang or whatever you want to call it of readers whose input I trust and, in fact, need if I wasn't going to listen to them. But it's always a question of, how much revision can you do? How many times can you rewrite things? How many things do you just want to fix? And how many of them do you want to trust your original view or your original vision, I guess, to use a more fancy schmancy artist word? Even if not everybody gets it, you have to sometimes say to yourself, yeah, but do I think it worked? And even if not everybody else agrees with me, I'm going to have to make up my own mind on some of these things. And in fact, that's what happens. But I have more time to worry about these things right at the moment. So I'm doing a lot of fiddly things, or I'm putting in commas and taking them back out again. This is, by the way, here's a bit of insider information, a bit of inside baseball, as we say in America, meaning not really necessary facts for completists, but if you're interested in them, they're interesting. This is my biggest complaint with my own writing, is my absolute overuse of commas, and I see it more in my early books. Thank God I've kind of reacted to it now and said, not all of these commas are necessary, and in fact the English language is changing a bit, and even the kind of most hardcore, I'm not talking about the Oxford comma, by the way. I'm talking just about the use of commas. There are times you don't have to use them, even though technically 50 years ago, 70 years ago, they would have been there. Anyway, as I said, this is probably getting a bit too much inside baseball. But that's the main thing that jumps out at me when I look at my own work. I'm like, what are all these commas for? Good God, there's like 6 of them in this sentence. And then I prune them out. And then when I'm going back to reread them sometimes a few weeks or months later, I'm looking at it and going, it doesn't read right. I took too many commas out and I have to put some of them back in. It's very tricky. Anyway, what else was I going to say? I don't know. So we are just in the mode that we've been in. We're dealing with change and confusion and all of that stuff. As I've already mentioned, we had a funeral last week from my dad. So, this has been the first weekend without major crises that we've had in a while, because my dad was in and out of the hospital before he died. I just kind of find myself collapsing a lot. I think it's just emotional, the toll of things emotionally. So I'll be like kind of cruising along and working and doing stuff like that. And then I'll just all of a sudden go, I just want to go to bed and go take a nap for an hour or something like that. And I'm not offering this as an excuse, or nobody has to tell me, oh, you're allowed. I know I'm allowed, for God's sakes. I mean, I work 7 days a week. And one of the ways that I deal with that is that when I want to take half an hour, 2 hours off, and go do something else, I do. And if that something else is a nap, by God, I'm going to have a nap, because naps are cool. I really like them, and that's one of the advantages. It's one of the reasons that when I was first starting out into the workplace, these many years ago, back at a time before there were personal computers and cell phones and all that stuff. But one of the main things that was on my mind at that time was that it's not that I don't work well with others. I don't work well with others when I don't respect them and they are in positions of power over me. And I had a few of those experiences in my early years in the working world, including one where I actually tried to kill one of my managers. Not kill, but he actually made me so upset that when I quit, I flung his keys at him from across the room. And I used to play baseball, so I got a pretty good arm. And if I had seriously, I wouldn't have minded at that moment if I had hit him and bruised him badly with him. I didn't. And I was like 40 feet away, so I wasn't actually trying to kill him. But I was so infuriated at that point with this particular human being. That kind of temper, it has calmed over the years, and I am much better now at walking away from situations, which I actually was doing that time. It's just that, he said some last thing to me that really irritated me, and I turned around and flung my set of store keys at him because I was working in a store at the time. Retail. Do I miss it? No, not at all. But anyway, so let me just quickly check in and see who might have showed up and might have left their tracks across the thing here. And let's see before they all disappear again. Oh, God. Come on, there we go. All right, so I see Tash is here, checking in from Oz. Timothy Roberts, good to see you. Christina, hello, Christina, and Petra. A pleasure. Oh, God, now people are disappearing off the end of this already. Tyson, good to see you. Holger, as always, a pleasure. Winter, same. Good to see you, too. Chris, thank you for all your help, sir. Suzanne, Owen, as always, good to see you. Wouter, same thing. Kristen, same for you. Ilva, darling, good to see you. We owe you a phone call. People keep dying and stuff. It gets complicated on this end, but apologies. But we do want to talk to you. Maria Jose, hello, good to see you. Iris, a pleasure as always. Rosalba, Sandy K, Summer, hello. Nikki Neck or Nisi Neck. I don't know if I asked last time how to pronounce that name, but tell me and I'll try to help. And I'll try to get it right. And Christy Sanders, hello, good to see you, Christy. And I see who else has popped up. Sherry Shomerus, hello, Sherry, good to see you too. It's been a while. And some others who have dropped off the thing I'm looking at. So I can only see a few comments at a time. It's ridiculous. On the other hand, thank God I'm not trying to do this on Twitter, which is not Twitter anymore, but it's X now. But don't even get me started. Don't even want to talk about it. Poor Deborah is absolutely miserable because Twitter was her workplace. And I mean that very literally. I mean, Deb was doing a ton of work on Twitter and has done for years. And as far as she's concerned, the platform has just been ruined under her. So I had never been that invested in it. And as a result, Facebook drives me mad, but at least it's still driving me mad in the same way that it drove me mad 5-10 years ago. So I guess I'm not really complaining. Anyway, so while everybody is here and we are all hanging out, I am going to start reading because that's technically what I'm here to do. So was there anything else I wanted to mention? No, just the usual. I mean, I kind of brush lightly over the emotional landscape because there's not really much to say, I mean, except the obvious. It is really weird to lose one's parents, and especially, in a family like mine where we were all very close to each other. And I strangely still wasn't expecting it. I mean, I'm not one of those people who's surprised to find out that human beings are mortal or anything like that. But there's not really much to say. I'm working with it. I'm trying to figure my way through. There's like a big chunk of what's my conception of the universe has just been sort of sawed off and taken away. And that's how it is. That's you are given these things. They are the nature of life. They are the nature of the physical shells that we inhabit. They do not last forever. And you know, I had color in my beard as recently as a few years ago. So I mean, it's not like I'm oblivious to the changes that time, um, the havoc of time that is wreaked upon us all. So anyway, so yeah, so there's not much to say. I appreciated very much all the kind things that people had to say and all the condolences and all that. And don't get me wrong, that is reassuring and heartening to get that kind of support and kindness from people. It really is. But ultimately, these things are, it's the basement. It's down the dark basement steps into something, and you've got to go there by yourself. And I'm not talking about death here. I'm talking about losing somebody or having a tragedy or, I mean, it's not just that. It's depression or a really bad depression or divorce or the sudden loss of an important job that was part of your self-image. There's all kinds of things like this that really can knock you backward. And so, yeah, it's super important to have that matrix of people giving you support and love and kindness, but it still ultimately is something that, you still have to go down those steps yourself and go down into that dark basement. That's all there is to it. And so, I'm a little bit in the dark basement right now and kind of trying to figure out, okay, what's in here? What am I going to take out of here? And when will I go back up the stairs again and try and see, what the rest of the world is like? I don't think that probably made much of any sense at all, but it was just, it was a metaphor that snuck up on me and then it kind of took over. So, without further ado, and without any further babbling and maundering and things like that, I am going to go back to the book and read from Brothers of the Wind. And the thing that was happening last time, excuse me, Hakatri, Inaluki, and Hakatri's squire and servant, Pamon Kes, who is the narrator, had received some word from Zaniko, the exile, the Norn exile, about a possible way they might be able to kill this dragon that is now the cause of so many problems. But they were going to need a witchwood tree. And the only two places where there are still witchwood groves that they knew of are in Azua, where Hakatri and Inaluki are from, but Inaluki cannot return there because of his oath, or in Nakiga, where the Norns live, and that's a long ways away and a pretty dicey situation at the best of times anyway. But they have heard from the mortals, the Hernsmen. These are before the place became known as Hernistir. They have heard from the mortal Hernsmen who first came to them about the dragon, that there might be an old witchwood grove that once belonged to the woman, the Sitha, who gave them their land. But that grove has been claimed by Inazashi of Silverhome, one of the leading and most powerful Scythi lords. And so they have taken a bunch of these herdsmen with them to help them, and they have gone up into the hills to try and find this ancient grove. They found it, but then Inazashi's son Yazashi showed up and has basically arrested them, and they have had to negotiate with Yazashi, who has finally said, well, you've already cut the damn tree down. I'm paraphrasing here. You've cut the damn tree down. You might as well take it. But I insist that you come and after you've finished your task, with the dragon, if you survive, you have to come and explain to my father what happened, because I'm basically going to be in a lot of trouble for letting you go. So that's what's going on. Anyway, so I am now starting again with Brothers of the Wind. Hakatri gave his brother a warning look, then said, "We agree, and I thank you for your generosity and forbearance. You have my word we will return to ask your father's forgiveness." Yazashi seemed amused. If you expect forgiveness, I think you may be disappointed. My father is seldom that way disposed, but I salute your courage in risking your lives for the good of others. Hakatri made a gesture of gratitude. We will not forget this. Then go and summon your mortal helpers, because I do not think you will be able to carry the tree down the mountain without them. Yazashi stood. My company and I will leave now, both because I do not want to linger long enough to regret my decision, and because I must prepare for the unenviable task that you two have shirked, telling my lord and father what happened here and what I decided. Yazashi led his men away. When only my master, his brother, and myself remained, Hakatri stood. Let us get to work. There is much to do. As the night turned toward morning, the two brothers hacked away the largest of the witchwood tree's limbs with their swords, until little was left but the great trunk. Then they respectfully burned the unneeded limbs, which would quickly lose their potency now that they had been removed. The smell of the smoke was so strange and so strong that it made me feel as if I had stumbled onto the dream road. When my master and Inaluki had finished, the trunk was still almost 10 paces long and very heavy. We harnessed the horses and began to drag it out of the grove, past the standing stone, and down the mountain. Along the way we met scouts from Prince Cormac's company, who then hurried back down to fetch the rest of their comrades. With their help, we made a cradle of ropes that allowed a score of the prince's men to lift the tree and carry it much more easily down the forested mountainside than we could have dragged it. Many of the prince's herdsmen, though ignorant of how close they had been to death during the dark hours, were nevertheless so pleased at leaving the vicinity of the grove that they began to sing as we made our way down from Old Whitecap's heights. I confess that as we hauled the massive witchwood trunk down the mountain, I was already fearful about returning to Serpent's Vale. The memory of that grim spot, its broken trees, treacherous muddy pools, and, most of all, the terrible beast that hid there, worked on my thoughts like an unending cold downpour. But I felt a superstitious reluctance to ask my master about it. For a long time he stayed silent, deep in thought, but because I rode near him, he finally looked up and must have seen the discomfort in my expression. What troubles you, Squire Pamon? I confess, master, I told him, that I am afraid of going back to that valley. In the end, we can do nothing else. He looked around for Inaluki, who was riding Bronze a little ahead of the rest of us, lost in thoughts of his own. My brother has pledged his honor that he will not return to our home while the worm lives. However rash that may have been, he will hold on to it. He will hold to it, even if it kills him. And more, I despise the idea of leaving the mortals to fend for themselves against such a monster. Do we not carry the blood of the dragon slayer in the same quantity as the Hikadaya? Our forefather, Hamako, risked his life again and again to keep our people safe from the great worms. The dragon slayer had led the killing of many of the dragons that threatened the garden in the days before its destruction. The Otuku's people claimed him as their own. The queen's clan called itself the Hamaka. My master's Zedaya people were Hamako's descendants as well, though his wife, Saonsara, had parted from him before my master's people fled their ancient home. Why did Lord Hamako stay behind when everyone else left the garden, my lord? The thought of what lay ahead still oppressed me, and I selfishly wished to distract myself when I should have let my master plan his strategy. Because he was dead, Hakatri said with a grim look and a shake of his head. Killed by his own dragon slayers, as the scourge of unbeings swept over the garden. I was startled. I have never heard this. Great Hamako murdered by his own kind? How could such a thing come to be? It is a long tale, full of shame and sorrow, my master said. It is also much disputed, especially between Zediah and Hikidiah. I would still like to hear it. He looked less than pleased. Why, Pamon, why should you care? It is a terrible story, and it is not even a tale of your own people. This shocked and hurt me, and for the first time that I can remember, I felt as though Lord Hakatri did not understand me. I had been raised among the Zediah all my life. Azua was my only home, and though my own Tanukadaya people lived there too in great numbers, I had spent far more time among my master's kind than among my own. Utuku and a few other Zediah immortals might still remember the garden, but none of my own folk did, except through stories and prayers. What other people did I truly have but my masters? I did not say any of this, of course. Many concerns must have troubled Hakatri at that moment, and all of us feared what might happen in Serpent's Vale. He did not need me to add to his worries. But as I rode silently beside him, he took a little pity on me, saying, "In any case, if you are frightened of what is to come, remember that you will not have to face the worm yourself. That is a task only for Inaluki and for me." After his earlier words, this felt like a blow to my chest. Did Hakatri truly think I was only concerned for my own safety? "But it is you I fear for, master, not myself. You and your brother." Ah. For a little while he was silent again. The trees of the lower mountain paraded past us as we descended, most covered with a green pelt of moss, after the season of renewal's early rains. The stone banks that jutted out from the slope were as dark as peat. It was a striking landscape, wilder than the lands around Azua, but that only added to my feeling of unease. After years of reassuring routine, though so much sameness had sometimes frustrated me, I could no longer guess what might happen next. "The Hikidiah tell of Hamako's death as a betrayal," my master said, abruptly, as though the tale now forced its way out of him. "They say that Rino, the leader of his hunters, was a son of Clan Kaura, which was more closely connected with the Sansere clans than most of Hamako's partisans. They say that in the garden's final hours, Rino and the others tried to force Hamako to board the last ship, but the great protector refused until he could be certain all of his people had been found and brought on board. At last they tried to carry him away by force, but Hamako defended himself so fiercely that he killed 3 of his own dragon slayers before being struck down by their arrows. Even after this, Hamako was still so revered that his kinsmen carried his body to the clan's tomb before they fled the dying garden." I said nothing. My master's face was full of disgust, though whether over the deed itself or the version of the tale he had just related, I could not tell. The Hamaka clan held a tribunal on the great ship, Singing Fire, as they fled the garden, he continued after a short pause. As Hamako's acknowledged favorite, Utuku made that tribunal one of her first moments of forceful rule over her clansfolk. Under her direction, Rino and the other surviving dragon slayers were judged guilty of Hamako's murder. I do not know what happened to them. Some say they were cast over the side of Singing Fire into the ocean indefinite and eternal. None of them reached these lands. But when they were being judged, Hamako's killers told a different story, though Utuku and her nobles did their best afterward to suppress it. You see, even then, not all the Hamaka, the Hikidiah to be, were comfortable with Utuku's seizure of power. These quiet renegades whispered that Reno had spoken with great regret of how Hamako had gone mad in the end, that when they tried to get him to board the waiting ship, he struck and killed the messenger who had been sent to him. And when the rest of his dragon slayers came, many of them his own kinsmen who had braved and suffered much at his side, defending the city of Tso and our people, he attacked them as well, killing more of them. At last, terrified by his strength and growing madness, Hamako was the mightiest of all the garden's warriors. They loosed their arrows and cut him down before he could take more lives. But which is true? I asked. We will never know for certain. Like Hamako, Reno A. Kaura and the others never reached this land, so they had no chance to tell their stories to more sympathetic ears than those of Utuku and her followers. He shook his head. I had not meant to tell you this story. It is particularly sad for our family, because Reno was a cousin of my grandmother, Senditu, and she never forgave the Hamaka for executing him without any of his clansfolk present. I am sorry, master. No fault of yours, good Pamon. He looked at me for a searching moment. Are you still fearing Serpent's Veil? I confess I am, master. If it brings you any peace to hear it, we will not go there soon. We have much to do before we enter that waste again. For one thing, we must prepare this witchwood trunk for our use, and since we do not have proper woodcrafting tools, that will not be a swift undertaking. So we do not go first to the swamp? No. We will camp somewhere close enough that we need not travel far when our spear is finished. But we do not want Hidohebi taking us unaware either, so a little distance is called for. Also, I still have much planning to do with my brother before the day comes. We will choose a spot a safe distance from Serpent's Veil. This relieved the worst of my fears, though I knew it was to be only a respite. The day would come sooner than I would like when we would have to ride into the Vale again to face the beast. But the knowledge that it would not be this particular day was enough to lighten my thoughts. After searching for a few hours at the bottom of the mountain, we found a wide, grassy dale that suited our needs. The herdsman told us it was named Sithmead, because the river that flowed through it originated in the heights at Skyglass Lake, home to Vinadarta's Zidaya folk since before the mortals arrived. If Cormac and his herdsmen saw anything curious in it now, becoming the camp of actual fairies, as they thought of my master and his people, they did not tell us. In fact, unless they were working directly with Lord Hakatri, or Lord Inaluki, all of the mortals except the prince and his closest companions largely avoided us, setting their camp a goodly distance away from where my master laid his own fire. I did not mind. The presence of all those mortals was strange and often disconcerting to me. Few of them spoke the Zidaya tongue, so they talked among themselves in their own speech, which I thought sounded like the barking of dogs, full of harsh sounds and, I must reluctantly say, truly unpleasant scraping noises made at the back of the throat. Neither would most of the prince's followers look directly at my master or his brother when they spoke to them. Cormac explained that many of them feared the fairy glamour, as they called it, convinced that gazing too long into the eyes of one of the Sithi, as they called even me, would put them under some kind of spell. It was not worth disputing this ridiculous idea, but the mortals' mistrust of us added to the strain we all felt as we prepared to face a deadly foe. Of the mortals, only Prince Cormac seemed utterly unafraid, and as the days passed in Sithmead, I began to believe that if the herdsman lost him before he became king, It would be disastrous, not only for Cormac's own folk, but for my master's folk as well, making it much more difficult for the Zediah to maintain a healthy peace with the mortals. But Prince Cormac would not let himself be treated differently than his men. He shouldered the same burdens and essayed the same wearying, painful tasks of preparing the great witchwood trunk for use. "Could we not use Kevisha on the end of the spear?" Cormac asked my master as they planned the work. "I have heard that in the old days the poisonous dust brought down some of the most terrible worms. Is that what you have in the jar Zaniko, the exile, gave you?" Kevisha is made from the pollen of the witchwood tree's luminous white flowers and is well known among healers. It is rare, which is likely a good thing. In small amounts it can bring pain ease, along with strange dreams. But too much of it, breathed or swallowed, could easily kill a mortal or one of the Zediah. My master shook his head. "Zaniko's jar is something else, as you will learn. No, I fear that even if we could go to all the cities of my folk and gather enough of the precious dust, it still would work too slowly. A beast as large as Hidohebi might take an hour or more to fall under its spell, and in that time it could destroy many lives. Worse still, the madness Kevisha can cause might goad it to even greater rage. Better to try to kill the monster with a single stroke to the heart. At least we will know quickly whether we have succeeded or failed." By the end of the first day in the valley, we had finished setting up our camp beside the stream, a sort of guild yard, with our only roof the naked sky. A few of the prince's herdsmen became sentries, watching the valley from its outer hills so that the worm might not come upon us unawares. The black worm was always on our minds, and we all knew that the mortals and Zediah killed in our first encounter with it still lay in the marshy valley only a short distance away in Serpent's Vale, unsung and unburied. Those of Cormac's men not standing sentry helped to roll and move the great tree trunk so that Hakatri and Inaluki might trim the stubby remaining limbs from the trunk and smooth its surface so that it would pierce instead of catch. They did this work with the only suitable tools we had, the brothers' swords, Indreju and Kimeku, and a witchwood hand axe from my master's saddlebag. My task was to sharpen whichever of those implements was not currently being used. I had much experience with Zediah whetstones, but was surprised and pleased when the herdsman brought me a sort of mushroom that grew on birch trees. Dried, it finished the edge of even one of those fabled Zediah blades as well as could be asked for. In truth, the woodcraft of the mortals proved to be very useful, as they knew the trees and plants that grew in Sithmead and the surrounding hills far better than we did. As my masters and some of the men trimmed the trunk, other herdsmen selected and felled sturdy oaks to make buckets for hauling water from the stream, and also used that strong wood to build huge racks on which the trunk would be lifted off the ground for hardening by hammer and fire. When I saw some of them working on the rope harness that had carried the witchwood trunk down from the grove, I thought at first that they were making nets for fishing, although the spaces seemed much too wide to catch and hold any fish smaller than the largest pike or catfish. When I asked about this, Prince Cormac was amused. "We are making a stronger harness for the witchwood spear," he explained. "Your master said we must be able to lift it quickly when the time comes." I nodded as if I understood, but I could not form a picture in my mind of what Hakatri planned. All our lives were at risk if the plan did not work, but I had spent most of my life trusting his wisdom, so I put my questions aside and went back to sharpening my master's sword. When one end of the tree had been carefully trimmed and sharpened to a point, we were ready to finish the huge spear. The surface of the witchwood trunk had been scraped until it was very smooth, and the fire we had built had burnt down to coals, so the herdsmen used their rope harness to lift the trunk up onto the heavy oak racks, with its pointed end above the flames. Then several of the mortals took up wooden hammers and began to pound on it. At the same time, the embers beneath the sharpened tip were fanned back into life so that the witchwood could be hardened. As the herdsmen pounded away, my master sang a quiet song he called the Dalala, which he said came from my ancestors and helped to soothe the wood as it was being shaped. I could not understand the words, but I thought I recognized some of the sounds, though I could not say whether that was because of the times Lady Ona had tried to speak to me in our people's tongue, or because of things I had heard from the other Tanukadaya in Azua. In any case, just hearing Hakatri sing those words made my skin prickle. The coals were only allowed to smolder under the spear tip for a short while, the men turning the long wooden post the whole time. Then the coals were raked away. The hammering continued through the day, Cormac's men pounding the witchwood until it was almost as hard as the finished strength of my master's sword. "We have done very well with what we have," Inaluki said as the men completed their tasks. "Yes," Hakatri said, "we have all done well. We will have a celebration tonight." And we did. 3 full casks of mead from Hernsland and a large jug of wine from Snowdrift were opened and emptied. Many, including my master, raised their voices to the skies in laughter and more old songs. For that moment, anyway, there was something like true accord between my master's folk and Cormac's men. Surely, I thought then, and still believe, this world has never seen anything quite like that night at Sithmead, when the great witchwood spear was finished. A night when mortals and Zediah drank and ate and sang together, perhaps for the first time ever, and possibly also the last. With our tree-sized spear now finished, the herdsmen rolled it onto the huge rope sling so it could be carried to the battleground. I say battleground, but the place we had picked was only a pond just across the Silver Way from Sithmead, a short distance into Serpent's Vale. My master had chosen it because the muddy water was deep enough to hide the whole length of the spear, and because the end of the pond opposite where the dragon lurked was an insloping, angled wall of granite. Using other stones as tools, this was no work for a precious witchwood sword, we chipped away for hours at that slab of granite until we had made a notch just below the waterline, which was big enough to hold the butt end of the shaped witchwood trunk. "It is possible the tree might shatter," my master said, "but it will not slip. It is held fast against the stone like a lord errant clutching a lance." Heavy ropes had been tied to the edges of the spear's harness. With the stonework finished, the cook fires lit, and the sentries sent out to keep watch, my master gathered us all around him and explained the plan that he and Saniko the exile, had worked out. "We must lead the worm onto the spear," he said. "Even 100 of us would not be strong enough to thrust it between the scales of his breast, but if we brace its back end against the stone, as a hunter digs the butt of his boar spear into the earth, we can hope that the beast's own strength and haste will do the work for us." "Skei skudodaya!" Inaluki snapped at a pair of weary herdsmen who were whispering to each other. "Stop chewing your beards and listen, mortals. All our lives may depend on it." The scolded herdsman fell into shamed silence at Inaluki's harsh words, but I saw several of their comrades share disgruntled looks. "With the new, longer ropes on the spear's cradle," my master continued, "you men will only have to stand before the great beast for a few moments. See how the ground slopes up on both sides of the water?" He gestured toward the rim of the pond, which had the granite shelf at one end but was otherwise surrounded only by dirt and stony scree. "The moment I call out, you must pull the ropes at the front of the spear. That way it will rise up from the water with the sharp end higher and the other end socketed against the stone. If luck is with us, the worm's headlong rush will bring it on to the killing point. When it is impaled, let go of the ropes and run as far and fast as you wish to keep safe from its tail, which will lash and flail mightily, as Zaniko the exile warned me." "But if I may ask something, Lord Akatri," said Prince Cormac, "I see the wisdom of the plan, but how will we convince the worm to come toward us, and to move swiftly enough to drive itself onto the spear? If we send men with sticks and torches to beat it out of the rack, as we drive boars out of a thick wood, will it not merely attack them instead?" The question set the herdsman to murmuring again, and I thought that my master would be annoyed with the prince. Excuse me. And I thought that my master would be annoyed with the prince, but a moment later I realized that Cormac and Hakatri had planned this aforetime, because my master answered quickly and without rancor. "A very apt question, Prince Cormac. No, we will not send beaters into the swamp, especially after dark, which will be the best time to effect our strategy, since the spear will be even harder to see then. Lord Zaniko gave me something to draw out the worm." He patted the wax-sealed jug which had come from Raven's Perch and had sat for so long in my master's saddlebag. "These worms mark their territories just as bears and wolves do, with scent. Before he fought the deadly snare worm, Lord Zaniko followed it for some time to learn its ways, and he collected some of the branches and grasses that the snare worm had marked. That is what is in this jar." "How does it smell?" one of the herdsmen asked. "Worse than you can imagine," said my master with a bit of a smile. "But trust me, by the end of this we will all know the stink of it better than we'd like." "Why would the No.293 come to the scent of another dragon?" a second man asked. "To fight a rival, of course," Hakatri said. "The black worm cannot know that Zaniko killed the dragon that made this noisome stuff a long time ago. It will smell its own kind and come to defend its lair. At least that is what we hope." The talk went on for some time. The herdsman, as anyone can understand, had many questions. At last the sentries were changed, and the rest of the mortals took their rest, while the prince, my master, and Lord Inaluki sat up to finish with the plans. "It is not enough that Hidohebi come to investigate this stranger's reek," Hakatri told us. "The great worm must be angry. It must be in haste to drive out the intruder. We need it to come running pell-mell into this little valley, and to do so without the ordinary caution even a large and dangerous beast maintains. And that is where your brother and myself come into things," said Cormac, pale and determined. Inaluki sighed. "Brother, my oath hangs on me like an awful weight of chains." He had a fevered look in his eye. "Let me be the one to steady the great spear instead of you. The risk should be mine." Hakatri shook his head. "No, brother. You are the more nimble rider, while I have better knowledge of the spear and its harness. You must be the one to lead the creature down on us, you and Prince Cormac." They argued, but Hakatri would not budge. Inaluki gave in at last, but he did not look pleased. "Then I will take my own spear," he said, "so I at least can strike the first blow." "As you wish," my master told him. "But if you fail to lead the beast down into this pool, all will be for naught, and many of us may die. Do not let your honor cause you to forget that." Inaluki gave him a strange look, half shame, half anger. "Do not treat me like one of the mortals, brother, like someone whose courage you doubt. You and I have fought side by side against giants and other fell creatures. You know my quality." "I do, which is why I gave you the most important role of all. Prince Cormac will entice the great worm out of his swamp, but it is you who must convince him to chase you to the spear." "I will not fail," said Inaluki firmly. He spoke the truth, as it proved, but in the end it was not enough. Hakatri nodded. "Then we all know our parts." "Except me, my lord," I said. "You have given me nothing to do." "You will be my second, Armiger Pamon. You will stand with me. If something happens to me, you will act in my stead to make certain Cormac's men do what they must." It sounded as if he was trying to protect me, to keep me from harm as he might protect a child. But a moment's reflection suggested that if Hakatri truly did not want me in danger, there were many places more wholesome he could have chosen than standing beside him as an angry dragon rushed down on us. My pride was soothed, but at the same time the sheer magnitude of what we would do next, of what we would do the next day, swept over me like a thunderous ocean wave, making me gasp a little and shiver, although I think none of the others noticed. In the middle night, as the Hornsland mortals slept, something huge crawled past our camp in the darkness. The sentries sent one of their number to let us know, but we had heard it already. Hakatri ordered the guards to move back into the camp. Then he, Inaluki, and Prince Cormac waited together, listening for any sign that the creature might approach us. I was at my master's side, of course, and again I heard that ghastly rattling as the great worm's armored body scraped against trees and over stones, and the snapping, loud as war drums, as smaller trunks broke under its great weight. As we crouched, listening, I could not help thinking of the horror of the first encounter, of Yoe and Lilumu and the others who had been killed by that dreadful beast. I trembled in all my limbs, but even terror would not force me from Hakatri's side. In the dim starlight I watched him for signs of the same fear, but my master's people do not easily show their inner thoughts, and I could see nothing but calm attention in his face as he listened. That helped me a little, but what aided me most was how the sounds gradually diminished in the distance. We did not hear the great beast again that night, so it must have returned to its hiding place by another way. Either the sheer number of men on the meadow had led it to pass us by, or it already had its stomach set on some easier prey, but the cold drake never came close enough to threaten us. Still, I could not forget that even if we survived the night, the next day would bring us face to face with the creature. When the dawn finally came, I felt almost as exhausted as if we had fought it. "Now, while the sun is bright," my master announced that morning, "we must make everything ready. Into the valley." Inaluki rode ahead with Prince Cormac to search out the best path from the dragon's lair to the waiting spear. As the two of them rode off, talking quietly, I realized I had never before seen my master's brother speak to a mortal as though to an equal. It was an arresting sight, and I confessed to a pang of envy, or something like it, because Inaluki had never treated me as anything but a servant. The plan was simple enough. Our pond and the witchwood spear were on the western side of a rise at one edge of the swampy vale. Prince Cormac was to ride farther into the valley, then draw the worm's attention and induce it to follow him. He would then ride up the slope of the rising ground, leading it toward the place at the top where Inaluki waited. It was then up to Inaluki to become the quarry in place of the mortal prince, and to lead the terrible creature down the slope to the place where Hakatri and the herdsman waited at the pond. At the last moment, before the great worm could turn away, the mortals would heave the sharpened end of the stone-braced spear up out of the water, so that the dragon's own weight and headlong rush would bring it on to the hardened point. Prince Cormac's men made their way down to the edge of the pond and took the harness ropes in hand. Returned from his scouting expedition, Cormac rode up on Seafoam. Hakatri had decided that the sure-footed mare would be a better choice for him than Cormac's own horse. "Remember, this mare needs only the lightest touch to guide her this way or that," my master told the prince. "She knows your thoughts almost before you do." He then passed Zaniko's jar up to the prince, who began to remove the wax seal, but Hakatri quickly raised his hand. "Do not open it yet, I pray you. Not until you are much closer to the worm's lair. We do not want to bring it down on us until all is ready. Also, you have not sampled its astonishing scent yet, but I have, and I am still trying to forget it. Trust me, good Cormac, and wear this over your nose and mouth, or you will be choking from the moment you unstop that jar." He handed the prince a scarf of fine weave. When Cormac had tied the cloth across his face below his eyes, he took the jar and a little hand broom made of twigs, and set off up the slope of the dell, cradling the pond. The prince carried no weapon except his sheathed sword, since he would need both hands to carry out his task. Inaluki appeared then, balancing a long war spear on his shoulder. He had donned his witchwood armor, as had my master, and I thought I could see their great forebears in them. Heroic And I thought I could see their great forebears in them. Heroic wormsbanes like the garden's Hamako and Isoga of Hikahikayo. But many of those noble Zediah came to ignoble ends, I realized, with a foreboding I did my best to ignore. Inaluki looked over the swampy hollow one last time, making certain of the landmarks, measuring out the path he would take to lead the great beast down on us. "Whatever happens next, brother," he called, "this will be a deed that will be sung long after we are gone." "Let us hope that we live to enjoy at least a few of the songs," Hakatri called back. "Ride swiftly, Inkasho. I beg you, do nothing foolish." Inaluki laughed, though I thought it had a wild edge. "Foolish? Me? I know our parents will never forgive me if harm comes to you," my master said. "Your bravery is well known. Take no risks." "That is a strange thing to say to someone going out to seek a great worm and beg it to chase him. But I hear you, brother. Then you and the prince, fare you both well." Inaluki lowered the visor of his helmet and raised his spear in salute before riding over the crest of the rise that separated the pond and its shallow dell from the rest of marshy Serpent's Vale to the east. Within a few moments he had disappeared from sight. "And now you, Pamon." My master pointed up the sloping wall of stone where the butt end of the spear was lodged. "I want you at the top, there." "But you said I would be beside you." "As I told you, if something happens to me, you must take my part and finish it. If you are standing close beside me and I fall, you will likely fall too. Also, someone must watch from a high place to tell me and these mortals what is happening before Hidohebi comes into our view." I climbed to the spot he had indicated, trying not to show reluctance. What he said seemed wise, but in those long-ago days I feared being thought a coward by my master's folk more than I feared for my own life. At least that is how I remember it. Memory, though, is not always the most trustworthy historian. And I'm going to stop there on memory, though, is not always the most trustworthy historian, even though I kind of messed the line up. And with that, hang on, let me just bookmark that. All righty. And with that, I am going to wrap it up, assuming that we have stayed on. Yes, it looks like we have stayed on. So, excuse me. With that, I am going to pack it in for the night. I thank you very much for joining me. I will be back at 7 p.m. 7 p.m. Later today to read the next section, which is where all the scary stuff happens. But many of you have probably already read it and know that. But if you haven't read it, I will tell you in advance that exciting things are happening. And what else did I want to say? Nothing really, except just that, as always, it's a great pleasure to share time with you. I will see you one way or the other very soon. And, take good care of yourselves. Take good care of the people around you as best you can. Starting with yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody else. But anyway, so that's where it's at, folks. Be good to yourselves and be good to others. I will see you 7 p.m. and then again this same time next week, I think. Yeah, should be. Shouldn't have any problem with that. So, see you soon. Peace. Ciao ragazzi. And be well.